All right. And so today we're going to review 3 areas. It's civic knowledge, civic values, and civic action. So more specifically in civic knowledge, I hope that at the end of today's presentation, you will feel like you're prepared to lead because you, one, will have a good understanding of common terminology that happens within the area of service, but also you're going to understand each organization that's participating today and ways that you can overlap and support each other. The second area is civic values. So we're going to specifically look at the concept of active citizenship. And then I'm going to share some participant data from our service activities last year in order to help y'all feel prepared to engage our volunteers this year. The third area we're going to review is civic action, and we're going to specifically talk about engaging volunteers while you're serving, as well as sustainable development goals or SDGs that you might already be familiar with. We're going to just go over those briefly and talk about how they should impact your organization. I have asked several leaders in your organizations to help me facilitate today. And so we will also have opportunities to hear from leaders from LSC, Serve 205, and Blazers on Break. So thanks in advance to those of you that are helping. And speaking of those that are helping, I'm going to now turn it over to Kamya Patel. Kamya is actually both a Serve 205 member and LSC member, and she's going to be guiding us in our icebreaker today.
All right, hey everyone, my name is Kamya Patel. For those of you guys don't know me, so today is going to be our modified guess who icebreaker, and basically if you have done it or if you are a part of something, then your cameras will be on, and then if you haven't, then your cameras will be off. But if you don't have a camera or can't be online for right now, a reaction is more than okay. So for the first one, I thought about I have been in Niagara Falls. So if you've been to Niagara Falls, keep your cameras on. And if you haven't, turn them off. All right. Okay. So for the second one, I have broken 1 or 2 bones. All right, for the third one, I have a pet. Okay, for the fourth one, I have fainted in a public setting. All right, I am a part of Blazers on Break. I have gotten stitches. I have been bungee jumping. I have been to 2 different countries. I have eaten food that has been out of date. I have wished to have Elon Musk's money. That's a lot of us. I have changed my major once or twice already. I have binged watched at least 2 shows over quarantine. I have dyed my hair color at least once. I have eaten a carton of ice cream. I am part of Serve 205. I have pretended to be sick to get out of school or classes. I am part of LSC. I have screamed during a scary movie. I have gone to at least 2 volunteering events held by a UAB organization. And I hope we all have this. I have Blazer Spirit. Nice. All right, good job, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Kamya, for leading that activity. Let's give her a round of applause. We can use our little reactions to do so, or you can clap on your screen. Fun. So I think that this activity is so important. And as you hear like icebreaker, you might think like, oh my goodness, I don't enjoy icebreakers. Or you might have the opposite reaction, be like, I love these opportunities to connect with other people. Either way, icebreakers are an important part of a service experience. And that's because you want to make sure that everyone that's present starts to identify commonalities. And so as we think about the activity you all just did, you might look at the screen and think, man, there's a lot of people here. I don't know these people very well. I might not have much in common with them. But as this just brief activity showed us, there is so much overlap, even in ways that you might never expect. Some of the ones that were interesting to me was like, who's traveled to 2 countries? I would love to hear, not right now, but it could be a fun conversation starter. What countries have you visited? Or even who has a pet? Something as simple as that can make someone feel connected immediately in a group and feel like they're a welcomed part of an experience. And so we hosted this icebreaker today to help you see those commonalities in each other, but also when you go out into the community to serve, to intentionally try to ask the right questions, to identify commonalities with your volunteers, but also with the community you're serving. It's so important that we are cognizant of the experiences we bring with us to the community and be open to learning about their experiences so we can truly learn and support them in the best way possible. And so thanks again, Kamya, for leading that activity, and thanks everyone for participating. I'm going to share my screen again here. You all can see Ice Ice Baby, yeah? Okay. So we're going to move forward. And so some expectations for today, and this is really transferable, I would say, to any organization meeting. And so I want you all to keep this in mind for your meetings as we go into the fall semester. Participation is always going to be key. If you're wanting to get the most out of this organization experience, the more you put in and are prepared for the meetings and are active participants while you're there, the more you're going to be able to take away from this experience at the end of the year. I also want you to ask questions. Ask the hard questions sometimes too, and whether you're comfortable in this setting vocalizing those or not, feel free to use the chat feature or to write these questions down, and let's have a one-on-one conversation about it in a smaller setting when we're with our individual orgs if we need to. And so ask questions. The third is try to keep your microphone muted. I think that that's just some Zoom etiquette. But the last and most important to me is to learn something new today. And so really challenge yourself as we're talking through the content today to try to absorb it and think about, how can I apply this to my experience? And then at the end of the day, we're going to have some time to reflect, and there's going to be some intentional reflection, which should also be a part of a volunteer experience. And so I'm saying that to say, while you're sitting there, if it's helpful to take notes, if you're the type of learner that needs to take notes as you go, I encourage you to do so. If you're watching this online after the fact, there are recording, pause here and get something to take notes with. And so with that, we're going to jump into the first content area, which is civic knowledge. And so first, when we think about civic knowledge, I like to provide you all with a little bit of historical context or knowledge about service at UAB, and specifically our service organizations. And so service at UAB, community engagement specifically, is one of UAB's mission pillars. And so just kind of use a reaction, give me a thumbs up if you knew that community engagement was a mission pillar of UAB. Have you ever heard that before? I'm seeing a few thumbs up. Okay, good. And I say that to say, like, it's okay if you didn't know that, but we all have a responsibility in ensuring our volunteers know that community engagement is a mission pillar of our institution. So what does it mean to be a mission pillar? That means that community engagement is part of UAB's strategic plan, meaning UAB has allocated resources, whether that be physical, in-person resources through volunteers, staff that are allocated to service and community engagement projects, or whether that be virtual resources like Blazer Pulse, which each of your organizations will use over the course of the year. and many, many more. So UAB is committed to community engagement. And so the statement here on the right of the screen is actually the statement from that mission pillar. I would encourage you to read that and be familiar with it, because again, you want to educate your volunteers on the fact that community engagement is a critical part of the UAB experience. Within UAB, there's a lot of ways we approach community engagement. So it's not just specific to these organizations and SIL. How many of you, give me a thumbs up if you've participated in a service learning class before? Any service learning class participants? No. Okay, well, great. Well, that's something that you could learn about and take away. I would encourage you to Google service learning. At UAB, you can actually get course credit for going out and volunteering in the community and focusing on specific community issues. There's also Blazer Pulse, which is a broad platform to support volunteerism and engagement. How many of you knew that you could record your your service hours on Blazer Pulse, whether you volunteered through Blazer Pulse or not? And so I'll use an example. If Ishika went to Children's Hospital over the summer, she could go and record every one of those service hours on Blazer Pulse. Good. I know at least LSC should know about that because we just talked about it, but I want to make sure you all do. So Blazer Pulse is an outlet. There's also something called the Benevolent Fund at UAB. The Benevolent Fund is committed to collecting funds from university stakeholders like professional faculty and staff, and then allocating those funds into the community. And so we're also a financial resource for our community. So there's all these ways, and these are just 3 examples of ways UAB is contributing to community engagement. You all play one huge way in which UAB contributes to community engagement, and that's through student involvement and volunteerism. And so there are 3 specified service organizations that receive university funds to support volunteerism, and that is the 3 of your organizations. One of the most common things I hear from your organizations is, let's say I'll use LSC. LSC, has one purpose, and then they're going to try to dip into Serve 205's purpose. And Serve 205 has one purpose, but they really feel like they should be doing what Blazers on Break is doing. And it's confusing because you don't each know how you are equally contributing to volunteerism, but supporting a specific niche at UAB. And so the purpose of this time this morning, as we talk about civic knowledge, is to give each organization a platform to share how you specifically support UAB volunteerism. And as you listen to each executive director or president talk about this, I want you to be thinking in the back of your mind, how can I collaborate with that organization to ensure a well-rounded volunteerism experience for my group? And so at this time, I'm going to ask each president or executive director, depending on the title, to share a little bit about their org and specifically how you might engage if you're not a part of that group. We'll start with Serve 205. Sierra?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sierra Samuel, and I'm the president for Serve 205. Serve 205, this will be our 3rd year at UAB, and our purpose is to facilitate ongoing service with mutually beneficial partnerships with UAB community partners and students. So we do this through continuous service, typically 2 weeks out of the month, for people to go and volunteer at a wide range of places, from Jones Valley Teaching Farm to the Level Ladies Center. We offer a range of opportunities based on the Sustainable Development Goals that I'm sure most of us have heard of and we'll talk about later in this training. But there's plenty of opportunities for everyone to be involved. All of our service projects are found on Blazer Pulse, and we also are active on our social media. So I encourage you to follow us. I'll put that in the chat. And so you can hear about our service projects, sign up, and kind of get a feel for serving during the week, just randomly whenever you have a chance.
Awesome. Thanks, Sierra. Okay, next we have Blazers on Break, Ulexi.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ulexi Plata. I hope everybody's doing well on this Sunday. So Blazers on Break looks a little bit different in comparison to Serve 205 and LSC. We have kind of a different community service experience. We do alternative break and organize that during spring break. And we also have the Winter Leadership Retreat. Kind of the vision for this, it is our 2nd year, so we weren't able to do the trip last year, is for the e-board to kind of promotion or let everybody know about this alternative break experience by participating with the other orgs and getting involved. So thank you.
Thanks, Lexi. And last but not least, LSC. And
Hi,
that's it.
everyone. Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Ishika, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Leadership and Service Council. So our purpose is similar to that of Serve 205 and Blazers on Break, and we conduct service, but we do it in a unique way. So we have 1-day service events 4 times throughout a school year, and there's opportunities for hundreds of volunteers to come out, and we have multiple sites, so they can choose wherever they want to volunteer at. So our events include Into the Streets, which occurs in the fall and the spring. And then we have Rise Against Hunger and MLK's Beloved Community. So there's several opportunities for LSC to get involved with, Serve 205 members and Blazers on Break members to get involved with LSC. So first, of course, is service. So coming out and volunteering at our LSC events. And then next is having the opportunity to serve as site leaders in either one of either Into the Streets or MLK Beloved Community. And then next, I just hope that LSC can serve as a support system for either Blazers on Break or Serve 205. So let's say Blazers on Break needs LSC to advertise for any of their alternative breaks, or I hope they can reach out to me and then we can get that going. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, Ishika, and thanks, Sierra and you, Lexi, for explaining. And so I know y'all heard this in student leader training, but we're refocusing on it because, again, I want you to think about what this means for your organization. And so the first thing I want you to take away is our organizations are not competing against each other. We should be working together and recruiting the same volunteers and encouraging a volunteer that comes out Into the Streets, for example, to go in November and serve with Serve 205. And then when they come out and serve with Serve 205, Serve 205 is telling them like, hey, if you enjoyed this, I think you would really enjoy the alternative break experience. Have you applied for Blazers on Break, for example? And so we don't have to compete against each other. We should be working together because each of our audience members are the same. We're targeting all UAB students, but the way in which we engage them is unique. And so we can work together to accomplish our mission, because ultimately our mission is to create change in our community and to help our volunteers grow as active citizens. And so again, I want you to think about ways you can engage. And if your direct role in one of these organizations would allow for collaboration, reach out to the other group. Don't be scared to do that. Know that each one of your groups are using Microsoft Teams. And so it's also really easy to just chat someone on Teams if you have an idea or want to talk about ways y'all might collaborate together. And so with that, you all are leadership organizations. Even though you're a service organization, at the root, you are a leadership organization. And so I want to pose to you, and I'd ask you to pull up the chat, everybody that can, pull up your chat and answer this question for me. Can service and leadership be separated? Why or why not? I'm going to give you all a second to respond to that. Can service and leadership be separated? Why or why not? Not really a right or wrong answer. It's just more of a perspective based on your experience. Shannon shared she thinks everyone who serves is a leader by example. Cool. What else does everyone think? I believe you can become a leader through service. Sure. By being a leader, you're serving for a purpose. That's so true. Other thoughts? Keep them rolling in. Can leadership and service be separated? A major part of leadership is serving those that you are leading. As an example, as a facilitator. Great example. Thanks for sharing that, Emma. And so it sounds like right now, kind of the trend is that y'all don't feel like these two concepts can be separated. And I want you all to be mindful that leadership as a concept is really based on your experiences. And so there's not one recognized definition of leadership across all scholars. There's not one practitioner that has said, this is the definition of leadership we'll use forever. And everyone said, oh, yes, like that makes sense. That's because leadership means different things to different people. What I want to share with you all today is what leadership means to me and what I hope leadership will mean to your organizations. And I truly believe that leadership and service can't be separated. And so in the Office of Student Involvement and Leadership, we believe service is a powerful vehicle for leadership. And so I've talked about leadership being connected to experiences. Well, we all know service and volunteerism is an experience. And when you go out into a community, if you're open-minded and absorb what's happening around you, ask questions of your community partner, you're going to leave there with an experience, and hopefully an impactful one that will guide and mold your leadership so that you can become a servant leader, so that you can become a facilitator of the volunteers you're supporting and use your leadership experiences to guide those volunteers. And so we believe, again, that through service, you will grow as a leader. We also believe that leadership's a process. It can be a position, but it's not always a position. So regardless of your position in these organizations, know that I'm considering you a leader, and I want you to step up to that leadership plate to impact your volunteers. Next one's so important to me, and I think it will be based on our values at UAB to you too. Leadership is inclusive and accessible. And as leaders, we make leadership inclusive and accessible. So for example, don't limit leadership opportunities just to your fellow peers in your organization. But as you learn and get to know your volunteers, invite them to be leaders for change in your community. Invite them to apply for these positions next year so they can take on a positional role. Invite them to share their thoughts and reflection at the end of your service experience so they too can use their leadership to facilitate growth in others. Leadership is collaborative. And so that's why we just talked about how we can work with each organization to better each other and to benefit all UAB volunteers and our community. Because if you're a true leader, you should want to work across these organizations and not just be focused on how your organization can make an impact, but how we can work together for the better good. And then lastly, leadership is values-based. Throughout the year, I might ask you all to reflect on your values, or we may do values exercises, or you might talk about the values of our organization. That's because at the root of who we are as leaders, it comes from our values, and our values, I believe, are oftentimes fueled by our experiences. And so again, be open-minded through this experience and share your values when you have the opportunity to do so. And so now that I've shared what leadership is, I'm not going to, treat this like we're in class right now, but I do think it's important as leaders and scholars of service, because you all, again, need to learn something through this. You should know the theoretical foundation that guides the work we do. And that's the social change model of leadership. And so the social change model of leadership is really built on this idea of there's 7 C's of leadership. And I want to go through each of these 7 really briefly. So first is consciousness of self. And so to be a leader, the idea is that you have to have self-awareness of your own personal values and beliefs. The second is commitment. And so the idea of commitment is that you are motivated to serve. And it has to take that intrinsic motivation to really make an impact in your community and to impact others. The third is congruence. And so this is that you're acting with consistency. You're not acting one way on campus and then acting one way when you're out with your volunteers and leading them and trying to impact the community, that you're acting with consistency and you're living your life in a way that serves others. The fourth is collaboration. And so again, we've talked about this one a good bit, but this is really having a common effort. So identifying commonalities, just like we did in our icebreaker, and then trying to use those for good. How can we collaborate and work together? Which leads me to the common purpose. So this is shared aims and values. And so to establish common purpose, you have to also have conversation to get to know one another. And that's not just between you and your peers. That's not just between you and your volunteers, but that's also between you and the community you're serving. Ask them questions, get to know them, truly be present while you're serving. The sixth is controversy with civility. And so I really like this idea as we think of leadership and our ability to make change, is that there will always be times when we don't agree. And I think that that's really healthy, in fact, for a group of leaders. We shouldn't always see eye to eye. That's something called groupthink, where one person has a vision and others just come on, because maybe that's the easiest way out for us to push through because we all see it the same. Rather, we should push each other outside of our boundaries, share our values, share the ways experiences have impacted you, and then with civility, discuss that so that we can all grow as active citizens, which is the 7th one, citizenship. And we're going to talk a little bit about active citizenship here momentarily, so I'm going to leave this one for that discussion. There is an 8th C that's not mentioned here, but so important as it relates to this model, and that is change. And so all of these things should work together to create change in you as a leader, to create change in the volunteers that you're guiding, to create change ultimately in the community, creating social change. And so social change model, if you wanted to sum it up, is individual values, group values, and societal values. And all these things work together to continuously be developing you and your leadership and your experiences to support the community. And so this is important. I'm not going to quiz you on this. Unless you're watching this recorded, you will get a little bit of quiz, so make note. If you're here in person, you don't have to take the quiz. You've looked out. But it's important that you at least know the foundation, again, for why we're doing what we're doing. It is theoretical. The next piece of foundations that I think is important to discuss is common terminology you'll hear in community engagement centered discussions. And so whether you're talking with a community partner, whether you are engaging in a service learning course, which I would encourage you all to pursue, or whether you're having a conversation with a peer about creating change in your community, there is some common language that's going to come up. And so here I have 4 sets of really just words. And these might mean something to you. They might mean nothing to you right now. I have asked for our leaders, so Sierra, Kamya, Ulexi, and Ishika, to lead breakout rooms where we're going to, 1, define these words, and 2, discuss for your organization what these words mean to you. And so the breakout rooms are going to be randomly assigned. I'm sharing that because I want you to talk about whatever organizations are represented in that room. I want you to talk about what that really means for you and your organization. The name of your breakout room will be the names of the definitions you've been assigned, but y'all go ahead and take a screenshot of this or either take a picture of it on your phone so you don't forget what rooms you're assigned. We're going to take 10 minutes in these breakout rooms. Again, to get the most out of the day, I'd like for everyone to participate in discussion. And so I'm going to go ahead. Is there any questions about the breakout rooms? None? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open these shortly. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to mute myself and then I'll see y'all in 10 minutes. Cameron, you need to join a breakout room. There you go. Okay, for people watching at home, I'm going to pause the video now. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for participating in the breakout discussions. I hope that that was a meaningful use of your time to connect with your peers. What's going to happen now, I hope y'all saw my message, is I want each group to share the definitions for the terms you were assigned and then talk about how it impacts your organization. And that's our timer, so let me stop that. Sorry about that. All right, so we're going to start with Sierra's group, and I'm going to pause my share so we can see one another. So Sierra, who was assigned to kind of share those definitions from your group?
Well, I was assigned to share a definition, so I'll go ahead and start. For mutually beneficial, we discussed how usually in a relationship where both parties will be gaining something out of the relationship. And a great example was given by a Serve 205 member who volunteered at Build Up, where he was able to gain kind of construction skills while also helping out with building the construction site helping. So like he was learning construction skills while also helping them out at the same time. And reciprocity, which I struggled to say the words, but we figured it out. Reciprocity we discussed as something where is very simple, similar to mutually beneficial, where both sides are able to gain something out of the whatever the encounter is. And the example given here was when SAR 205, like SAR 205 project coordinators were invited to be site leaders for day of service, and it was a reciprocal relationship.
Thank you all for sharing. So yeah, y'all kind of had a fun one thrown at you because essentially these two words would define each other. They have the same kind of root meaning. But oftentimes we don't say just in common conversation reciprocity because it is a little bit of a tongue twister. You're probably going to hear that more often stated as it's mutually beneficial. What I want the takeaway for all of you to be as we talk about relationships being mutually beneficial with the community is that our presence in the community is not a replacement for reciprocity. So our presence doesn't mean we're automatically being beneficial for the community. It might be beneficial for us because we're meeting the needs of our organization, which means we take volunteers out and expose them to community. But do we know what the community actually needs? Are we asking them when we're reaching out to them to schedule service sites, hey, what do you all need that we can support you with? Or are we saying like, hey, we need to serve, can we come serve with y'all? And so again, our presence doesn't make us meaningful when we're there. It doesn't make it mutually beneficial. That really comes with energy and impact and a willingness to ask about what those needs are and to make sure when we're there, we are meeting those needs in order for it to be mutually beneficial. Great job to Sierra's group. Okay, next we're going to go with Kamia's group. And their words were active citizenship and reflection.
Yeah, so actually, I'm just going to do active citizenship and Shannon's going to do reflection. So active citizenship, we define it as something that is progressing in the community and viewing the community as a priority when making life decisions. And it's not like a role you have like on a resume or just to say you have a role, you know, it's something that you do to actually go out in the community and do your part in seeing what you can do.
And then I'm going to do reflection. So we decided that that was kind of used as a tool, most importantly, to get feedback from the volunteers that take part in our service projects and kind of bring in that 8th C and see what we need to change for the next service project to make things flow more efficiently and just be better service members for our community. So yeah, that was our definition for reflection.
Great job. And I think that these two things can actually play together in a lot of ways. And so reflection is something we're going to talk more about at the end of our time together today and how that really engages our volunteers. But through reflection, we're helping our volunteers grow as agents of change. And so growing as active citizens. And we'll look like at the active citizenship spectrum here shortly. Good job to your group. All right, you Lexi, we're going to you next with collaboration and root cause.
All right, we'll have Sebastian cover collaboration and we have Christy covering root cause.
Yeah, so we talked about collaboration and we talked about how it's like there's like many things going on because collaboration is basically people working together. But like, for example, like in Serve 205, and also somebody mentioned it for leadership and service council. But not only like do like organization members work together, like between like project like Serve 205, I know project coordinators and like e-board, but like also like when you go to volunteer events, you're like the leaders are also working with volunteers to collaborate because without that, there's no like value or learning process there.
And then for root cause, we said that it's like the underlying kind of covert reason for many different issues that can arise in communities. And with each of our organization's specific projects, it's really easy to lose sight of the actual root cause that we are, you know, trying to alleviate. And these kind of go hand in hand with the SLGs. So all of our orgs try to give reflections at the end to like put the service into context.
That's really great. And so sometimes it takes, these two words play together. Sometimes it takes collaboration with the community partner and discussion as a site leader beforehand with that partner to understand the root cause. Like the root cause may not always be apparent to you. It may take you really investing in learning, asking the right questions, inviting even that community partner to speak with your volunteers at the end of service for y'all to make and draw those connections. But to grow as active citizens, which you'll see in the spectrum shortly, we do need to start establishing an understanding of what those root causes are. So great job to your group. And our last group was led by Ishika. Their words were social change and capacity building.
Okay, so for social change, we defined it as continuously being able to be flexible and adaptable. So that includes being more understanding and then changing our thoughts and concepts as we learn more. And we also included it's how we learn and grow together. So the contribution to the larger society of social change is increasing inclusivity and everyone coming together for a particular issue that will increase the chances of fulfilling that goal relatively quickly. And then for capacity building, we defined it as efforts to strengthen your organization as a whole. So it's, by providing training like we are with service foundations right now. And it's a way of growing and bettering ourselves and our group and ensuring that everyone is on the same page by having an open discussion about any topics. And then what someone else said that particularly caught my interest was helping to build emotional capacity about helping people. And then in overall, it just helps to help fulfill the mission of the organization smoothly, and it minimizes the obstacles that might come in any way.
That was great definitions. And so specifically capacity building, I do really love how someone defined that specifically as it related to emotion and the people you're serving. I would say that you will most likely hear this terminology capacity building as we enter into a community. And we might ask, what can we do to help? And they might say, well, we really just need capacity building support. Well, you're going to have to ask the right questions to determine what capacity they're wanting to build. So is it emotional support? Is it support, maximizing the number of the homeless that can go through a food pantry line in one day? What are they trying to grow? What target areas are they trying to build? And how can we as volunteers go in and support them in that way? You may also hear within our organizations this idea that we need to capacity build. And so that might look like, are we maximizing every person that's a part of our organization? Does every person feel like they have a purpose? In their presence there, do they feel like they're being maximized? If not, how can we capacity build to expand the reach of our organization? And then y'all were spot on with social change. Social change, I feel like, is something that's, I hate to say this, but kind of trendy right now. And that's a positive thing, I think, for our global citizens across the world. We're going to talk about sustainable development goals. All of those contribute to social change. The conversations we're having, I'm going to even say like on Instagram, on social media, where we're really bringing awareness to things happening, even just in our country, in our cities, in our states. All those things contribute to social change. So it's this concept that we can be aware of what's happening. We can be open to learning. We will share our perspective when it's appropriate to share. And ultimately, when we enter a community, we're going to enter it to make an impact, to change that community for a positive based on what their needs are. And so again, it's not us transferring our ideologies or us transferring our concepts of what change looks like for a community, but being open to learning in an effort to educate others and to create true impact and social change. And so I hope that this activity was helpful for you all. Again, you're going to hear this language. I want to encourage you to use this language. Scholars in the field of community engagement, this is the type of language they're using. And I want you to consider yourself really an expert amongst the student body at UAB and start helping other students identify with this language and the meaning of this language and the work we do in the community. And so with that, we're going to continue on. You all should be able to see my screen again. Give me a head shake so I know that y'all can. Okay, great. And so now we're going to transition. We're almost to the top of the hour, so we're going to transition to civic values. We've talked a good bit about active citizenship up to this point, and so we're going to look specifically at the active citizenship model, and then we're going to talk about participant demographics. And so first, this idea of the spectrum of citizenship or spectrum of service, or you might hear it called the active citizenship continuum. Those are all the same thing. We're really referring to this image that you can see shared. This is the idea that as we enter communities, we enter as a member of that community. Maybe we're not concerned with what's happening around us, or we're oblivious to what's happening around us. We're just present. That then, through service, can shift to being what's labeled as a volunteer. A volunteer is someone who has good intentions, but maybe they haven't thought through the big picture. So we'll use reciprocity, for example, now that you all know the meaning of that. A volunteer might enter the community to do good, but not really know what that community needs. So therefore isn't making maybe the impact or change that they had hoped their presence there would make. So they have good intentions, but it's not well-rounded. But then you have your concerned citizen. This person is well-informed. And so like we talked about root causes, this person is really intent on not only being present and volunteering, but asking the right questions to understand why this is happening. What's the root cause? How do I make a difference? What do you need from me as a volunteer to support your community? When you can navigate along the spectrum and get to that concerned place with time and experience and effort given to make a difference in your community, aware of your presence, how your presence impacts the community, but also aware of what the community needs and what you can grow and learn from them, you can ultimately become an active citizen. This is when community takes priority in your life choices. It's values driven. And so earlier you heard me talk about the social change model of leadership and what I believe in terms of what leadership is. And I told you all that it's values based. And we talked about those individual values, team values that ultimately create societal values. As an active citizen, you have to have a value for community, a value for true change, a value for learning, I would even say, and this is kind of my personal perspective there, to truly be an active citizen and to support the community in the way in which I think we all desire to support them. It is not realistic to assume that anyone starts out as an active citizen. I even want to share with you all that it is not my expectation that by the end of your year in leadership, that you will have navigated to a point of active citizenship. It's my expectation that through this experience that you at least navigate from a member or volunteer to a concerned citizen. It takes time, it takes education, it takes experiences to really get to that active citizenship point. But I do want you all to start being concerned about what's happening around us and identify ways that we can mutually support the communities in which we serve. And so I want to ask you all if you're comfortable doing this. If you're not, you don't have to. But you should see on your Zoom menu a little pencil and it should say annotate. If you see that, pull that up. And when you click on annotate, you should see an option for a stamp, and there's a star or a check mark, a heart. I want you to stamp where you feel are and really be, we're not going to see who stamped what, but really be reflective. Where do you feel like you currently are? Are you just a member? Are you a volunteer? Are you concerned? Or do you really feel like you've made it to active citizenship? And so everyone who's comfortable doing so, go ahead and stamp for me where you feel like you are so we can get a gauge. If you're having trouble stamping, you can also just drop it in the chat if you're comfortable. Again, this isn't required.
How are you able to find like the stamp again?
So in your Zoom toolbar, you should see annotate. It's a little pencil. Does it look different on anyone else's screen? Do y'all see that?
Usually it appears like under view options, but it's not giving the option right now to annotate.
Well, we won't be playing this game then. Let's see. I don't know how to give y'all, it looks like y'all have access. All right, so we won't be doing that. I was really hoping to gauge kind of where you all feel like you are. I don't feel like it's something that you have to put in chat so people see kind of your name associated to it. And so we might do this in your organization meeting. What I really want you to do is to reflect on where you are and give yourself some goals. What can you do this year to grow and to take that next step of citizenship, to be more concerned and to make this a priority in your life and values, okay? And so I hope that this visualization is helpful as we talk about active citizenship. So we know our roles. So we've talked about being a concerned member of our community. We know the language. We've defined all the common language that we use in the area of community engagement. So how do we lead the effort? So how do we shift from this idea of civic knowledge and civic values into this area of civic action? And so what I want to share with you all is currently how we've led the efforts from our organization's perspectives. And so at the end of each semester, what I do is I download a list of all volunteers that engaged in any of the service events from our 3 organizations. Then I pull demographic reports based on your banner data. So that's from your BlazerNet. And I try to look at what are the classification of our volunteers? What's the ethnicity of our volunteers? What's the schools that our volunteers are learning in, and where are they gaps? And so this is really insightful for me as I think about who do we need to target to make sure we're meeting our audience, and that as we think about civic action, we're really engaging the right people. I want to share that data with you all, and I hope I've made this digestible, but y'all feel free to stop me and ask questions as we look at this. And so again, this is from last year. So Blazers on Break, I'm sorry, since we didn't host our Blazers on Break experience, y'all's data is not going to be included here, but it will be included next year. I still think that this is telling in terms of the number of students who volunteer on our campus. So again, this is representative of all students who volunteered last year in any Serve 205 project, as well as Into the Streets. It's also representative of students who participated in the Ambassadors Hygiene Drive. So let's look at ethnicity here first. We can see that there are certain demographics, and maybe even some that you're not seeing here, that I think we are under maximizing. Like, there are so many more students on our campus we could be reaching and encouraging to volunteer with us. And so as we're thinking about recruitment efforts, I'm going to think about our Black student population, for example. Maybe we should try to specifically reach out to Black student organizations such as BSAC, which is out of the Student Multicultural and Diversity Office. Or maybe we're reaching out to groups across campus like African American Studies, the groups that are scholars in that department, to share our volunteer opportunities. And so that's just one example of one population of students that isn't representative, I don't think, of our full campus in a way or idea on how we could really maximize our ability to connect with them as potential volunteers. Then you look up here, there's only 4% of our volunteers that are international students. A way we could address that is maybe intentionally reaching out to the international mentors, for example, and encouraging them to share this with international students. Or maybe we're working with Into UAB to go table over there in their space to recruit those students. You can see that largely the majority of our participants are female students. I do want to add the caveat that when I pull this data from BlazerNet, it does not give multiple options for students to identify different gender identities. So I am reflecting what is reported there, with the understanding that we have students that don't fit into just these 2 categories. And so we do need to take that into consideration. We want to provide volunteer experience for all students, regardless of how they identify. But I do think that this is helpful to see that we are targeting, it looks like, mostly female identifying students. How could we broaden that? And then lastly, and this one might be the most surprising for me, on campus versus off campus, only 30% of our volunteers last year were on-campus students. I would feel like on a typical year, and I know last year was COVID, but that it would be really easy to recruit residents to volunteer with us, especially because a lot of our volunteer projects are close to campus. And so I want you all to think about, how do we get in the residence halls? How can we collaborate with RAs? I'm sure some of you are even RAs. How can we spread the message to our residents to have more of them volunteer with us next year? Now let's look at their academic profile. So of our volunteers last year, 31% of those students were juniors. 27% was the, let's see, I went backwards. Sorry, y'all, didn't mean to click that. 27% were sophomores, but only 13% of volunteers were freshmen. And so again, as we're thinking about who do we need to recruit to serve with us, how can we maximize and capacity build on our campus, we need to tap into the first year class. Also, you can look over here, and this is, I think, not that surprising because there's so many students in arts and sciences, but we can see the large majority of our volunteers are arts and sciences, and then also health professions. I would say a lot of this might be because their major directly aligns with a service experience and needing service on their resumes for professional schools or as a part of their program. Like I know nursing, for example, requires service hours. How can we reach out to these groups, though, to encourage them to serve with us regardless of that program requirement? How can we collaborate with academic units to get more of their students engaging in service? Because as you all recall from the very start of this presentation, UAB's mission pillar is community. One of them is community engagement. And so every UAB student should be experiencing community engagement as a part of their UAB experience. So how could we use this data to work with academic units to encourage volunteering? Any thoughts or questions about this demographic information? Is this helpful for you all to see? Yeah, I'm gonna give you a second if you have anything you want to share. Feel free to use the chat. All right, it looks like no one has anything to share, and that's okay. Know that I want y'all to be intentional, though, to recruit some of these populations that are underrepresented. It's important when we go serve the community that the people serving are representative of our community. And so we have to think about our internal community well. Are we serving them well? Are we intentionally providing everybody with an opportunity to make an impact? And then lastly, I want to talk about volunteer retention. And so I will say, and I just want to be honest with y'all, sometimes we get some flack from academics or people that are scholars in the field because they say, well, y'all are just getting people to come out one time. You know, how is that really making an impact? How are you really teaching them anything? Well, I always counter that with, well, our goal isn't that a volunteer will come out one time, but they'll come once, see the benefit and value and have a positive experience and start learning about the community and want to return and serve again. And so I want to challenge you all. Our goal should never be that a volunteer comes out once, even if it is. I know LSC, y'all have one day of program events. You should then be encouraging them to go volunteer with Serve 205, to go on alternative break, to come back to Into the Streets in the spring. We have opportunities and we all work together to provide a holistic service experience for our volunteers, but we have to get them to return. And so I think some of this data is kind of obvious based on the nature of how we serve. So Into the Streets, y'all have less service events. Only 13% of our volunteers, though, in the fall returned in the spring. And so that's a pretty low number. Let's really make a goal. Site leaders, if you're in this room, think about like what you could be telling to your volunteers to say, hey, we're going to do this again in March. Y'all come back then. Serve 205, more than half of your volunteers served more than once. So I think that we have some momentum there. How do we continue that and even grow that number? Because we offer so many service projects. We just need to get them back multiple times so they can still start to grow on that active citizenship spectrum. We don't want them to just be a volunteer. We want them to become a concerned citizen. And so collectively, you can see over here, very few students served 3 or more times. I want that not to be you all, you know, I want you all, sorry, to be the students that have served 3 or more times. I don't want you to just go to your organization's events, but if you're a Serve 205 project coordinator, go to LSC's Into the Streets, sign up to participate in alternative breaks. Like, I want to encourage you all to have the same mindset that you should be continuously serving and not just making it a one-time experience. And so with that, all of that brings me to our last point today, which is civic action. And so we've talked about the knowledge and foundations. You'll have an idea of the theory that supports the work we do. We've even looked very specifically about who our volunteers are. But now what do we do to engage those volunteers once they get here? And so we're going to specifically talk about this concept of engagement, but it's going to connect directly to the idea of reflection. And so as y'all think about engaging a volunteer, I want to first address what kind of feels obvious in some ways. Pretend you're at a service site or you're hosting, if you're Blazers on Break, you're hosting a roundtable discussion. And in the middle of that, you feel like you're getting ready to start your activity and you see someone who maybe just doesn't feel like they're comfortable, or that you can just tell they're kind of retreated. How do you make them feel a welcome part of your group? Well, you're probably going to have to take yourself out of your own comfort zone, really push past the awkwardness to go over there and make them feel like they're a welcomed and valued volunteer, and to make them, through small talk, feel like they're appreciated and need to be there. That is often difficult. And so I want to acknowledge from the beginning that being bold when it comes to engaging your volunteers can feel uncomfortable. I want each of you to push past that uncomfortable feeling and force yourselves to be engaging, because you likely can also relate to what it feels like to be in a room or to be in an environment where no one's talking to you, or where you really don't feel like you know what your purpose is. That also requires for you not to be solely honed in on your peers that you know that showed up for service. We know a lot of times that our friends are going to come out and support us when we're serving, but you need to, of course, be pleasant to them, but also shift to loop in those people who came that you didn't know. As we're engaging a broader audience, you've got to be intentional about that. So I know that that's uncomfortable. I want to challenge you in that way this year to push past that feeling to make everyone feel engaged. And so there's 3 tips for how to engage your volunteer I want to share with you all. And it's easy to remember: what, so what, now what. And so it starts with what. When everyone gets there at the beginning of service, you want to immediately make people feel welcome. One way that's so easy to make people feel welcome is just saying their name. And so you all can use the Blazer Pulse app, which we'll talk about as we get into the year, to check people in for experiences. You'll see their name. You're going to have to ask for their name when they show up. Try to remember their name and repeat it back to them through conversation. After you check them in, don't just stand there and look down. Say hey, so what's your major? Or have some small talk. Go ahead and have a few small talk options in your pocket ready to pull out. Not physically, you don't need to write them on an index card or anything, but just to be ready to discuss. That's going to help you feel more comfortable in that moment and make that volunteer feel more prepared to contribute to discussion throughout the day. I've even seen some service projects where there will be an intentional kind of icebreaker at the beginning of service. Know your service site. If there's an opportunity to do that without it taking away from the service you're supposed to be providing, build that into the experience so everyone gets to know each other. So knowing at the beginning that what is important, what can you do from the start of service to make everybody feel like they belong. Transfer that then to so what. And so you don't want to make someone feel welcomed and then walk off, leave them, and not talk to them till the end of the day. This is an opportunity for you to be asking the community partner questions and looping in your volunteers so that they can listen and learn, and y'all can engage in dialogue together. That dialogue during service is so important. So one, you can get to know about the community, but you can also create community between you and this volunteer for the future, the other volunteers that are surrounding you all. And so try to have conversation, try to ask those hard questions. Think about what is the root cause, ask your community partner, ask one another, and engage in that dialogue. So when you get to the end of service, reflection is going to be easy, which is the last part. Now what? So when you get to the end of service, never, whether you are on Blazers on Break and y'all are doing service every day, or whether you're LSC and it's Into the Streets have just finished and y'all are exhausted, or Serve 205 where you've had project coordinators and y'all's cars are parked all over and y'all are having to scatter at the end, never should everyone just leave. You always have to do something called reorientation. After you serve the community, you need to mentally prepare to enter back into your community and think about the impact that you can continue to make and provide for the community in which you just served. Think about their root cause and your responsibility to them. That's often easier to do if we reflect on the service we just did. There's going to be a lot of times when you all are out serving and you are pulling weeds at the Birmingham Botanical Gardens, for example, and you're going to feel in that moment maybe sweaty and underappreciated and maybe like you are not sure why you're even there. That's a kind of normal feeling as a volunteer. And just remember, if you have ever felt that way volunteering, it's very possible your volunteers also feel that way. through reflection, you can create meaning from service. You have to be prepared to lead reflection. You have to look up information beforehand, talk with the community partner while you're there to learn, and you got to be willing to facilitate. And so that means listening, not to prepare what you're going to say next, but to actually hear people and then respond to encourage other people to contribute to the conversation, to actually facilitate a dialogue. And through that, volunteers can take away meaning from this experience. And so just remember, as you're out volunteering and leading sites, what, so what, now what? And so there's 5 tips I want to share, and then we're going to hear some examples from people who have volunteered or led projects in the past, share some thoughts from their experience. And so first, plan ahead. 2, identify a facilitator. So let's say if you're serving in a group that beforehand y'all talk about, okay, who's going to lead the front part when we're welcoming everybody, who's going to lead the end part when we're reflecting. Involve community members. If you all recall, for those of you I served with at the Love Lady Thrift Store, for example, at the end when the community members shared their stories, that was so impactful. They'll share if you ask usually. Have a clear closing. So it can get awkward when you're finishing up a reflection and we're like, well, all right. And no one knows what to do. Be sure you're like, all right, guys, well, thanks for coming out. That's the end for today. Make sure you check out more volunteer opportunities on Blazer Pulse. If this is Into the Streets, for example, maybe check out our other organization, Surf 205 and Blazers on Break. They have opportunities coming up, like giving a plug for other groups or upcoming opportunities. And last, think about reorientation. So through that conversation, think about what this means for us when we return to campus. So that's my tips. I'm going to stop talking for a minute and I'm going to open it up to Ulexi, and I believe it was Kamya who shared that they wanted to really reflect on their experience engaging volunteers. Ulexi, you want to go first, or Kamya? I don't have a preference.
I can go. All right, so I know she talked about a lot of the aspect of when you're a leader, but I think it's important to remember that you were once there. I mean, I can remember when I was thrown into, okay, let's do reflection. I was like, wait, what? Like everybody's like thrown off, everybody feels awkward. But just keep in mind that you were there, so be empathetic and understanding. So I came up with like a list of advice, and this can be advice for you personally, for you as a leader, or for even like you being a volunteer. So just don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Somebody there cares what you have to say, and don't be afraid if it sounds dumb. I mean, you shouldn't even care, to be honest. Just share what you're thinking and just be open. And then to further like reflect on an experience, I would recommend for you to write about your experience, type journaling or whatever. You can just write it on a piece of paper. And then try to connect at the experience, find commonalities with someone. And then I think it's important as a leader, this is something that I learned from a teacher, to say their name and say, I want to hear what you have to say, because that way the person feels like, oh, this person cares for what I have to say. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Lexi. I think reflection is important because it can lead to change and improvements and continuing to really be active in the community. And by reflecting, you can see why you did it and like the changes and the ways you can improve. I know for the first volunteering event that me and my project coordinators had to do for Serve 205, it was at the Vulcan Trail. And we really didn't know much about anyone or anyone at all. And but one of our volunteers decided like to make it less awkward and more fun by playing a game. And she basically kind of like called it the letter game. And you basically choose someone next to you or near you to like list a restaurant. So like, for example, if I said McDonald's, the person next to me would have to say or something with the last letter, like Steak and Shake. So since the McDonald's ends with an S, the first letter of the next word restaurant has to start with the last letter. And towards the end, during the reflection, we asked them like how their experience was, and they told us that like, oh, first it was awkward, but like that game really helped us feel welcomed and more comfortable with each other, and it really enjoyed our time giving back to the community. And they told us like, oh, we didn't feel like strangers, rather we felt like a couple of volunteers, and volunteers that made friends along the way. So yeah, that's my personal story about a time where like it felt awkward at the beginning, but once you really try to initiate conversations, whether that be in a form of questions or games, the awkwardness does go away here and there. And more people begin to become more comfortable with one another.
Thanks, Kamia and you, Lexi, for sharing. That's such great advice. I want to open it up to anyone else who wants to share your experience, whether it's as a volunteer or as leading a volunteer project. Feel free to unmute yourself. I'm going to give everybody a second if anyone wants to respond before we move on. Okay, this was a test. How many of you thought for half a second, like maybe I should unmute myself and say something because I'm starting to feel uncomfortable? Did anyone feel that way? Like shake your head, give me a thumbs up. Typically, there is power in silence. And even though that silence I just gave y'all for what, half a minute, not even that, it wasn't 30 seconds. It probably felt like 30 seconds. That started to feel uncomfortable. When you're leading reflection, even though it was not effective in this setting, I do want to say no one did unmute themselves. Own your silence. Sit in that silence for a second, even when it gets uncomfortable, because someone who might want to say something but's working up their courage needs that moment of silence to process even what they're thinking that they want to say aloud. We also need to remember not everyone is an extrovert like me. You know, some of us are internal processors and might not want to contribute in a setting. So giving people a moment to process whether they plan to explain anything or share anything aloud either way. So sit in that silence once in a while. All right, you all. Well, we are almost to the conclusion of our time together, and I really wanted to finish today with us talking about a concept which I hope you have heard before at this point, and that is sustainable development goals. I am not going to get into the weeds of what sustainable development goals are. I'm going to give you kind of a high-level overview because in your organization meetings, working with your volunteers, you're going to spend a lot of time on sustainable development goals. What I hope to do is establish it as a priority for us to recognize and understand what these are and to make it an intentional part of our volunteer experience. And so when I say sustainable development goal, you should know that you might also hear someone refer to this as a SDG. So that's our acronym for it. But keep in mind when you're talking to volunteers, be careful if you say SDG as you're leading a reflection or talking in conversation, because they're going to have no idea what that means. So just be mindful to state it out so that people understand what you're talking about. You also need to be prepared if you introduce a sustainable development goal in conversation to have a few points you can provide that really explain what these are. So I've given you 3 examples here. So if you were to say, yeah, so this is actually, you know, a no hunger sustainable development goal. A sustainable development goal was created by the United Nations, was adopted by 193 countries back in 2015. It includes 17 different goals. So no hunger is, or zero hunger is one example of those goals. And it's something that globally we're trying to accomplish by 2030, that we could get to zero hunger by the end of that time frame together. So it's these, again, goals that we're working towards. And so I want to encourage you all to be prepared to have that conversation with someone and kind of explain that in dialogue. There are, as we just said, 17 goals. Each of your organizations for every service, event, or activity. And so whether it's Serve 205 and you're going to different service projects, you're going to have a sustainable development goal associated to it. If your Blazers on break, when we're identifying the locations for our service, we're going to have one or more sustainable development goal associated to it. Into the streets, for example, in LSC, y'all might have 20 sites. Every site should have a sustainable development goal associated to it. That is not only because we are wanting to contribute to a global cause, but also because the work we do is not just about volunteering, but it's also about education. And we're trying to create concerned community members and UAB volunteers. And a way to create concern is to help them connect to root causes. Sustainable development goals, I encourage y'all to look it up on your own time, not rely on your organization to fully fuel you with the information you need, but look it up. They provide you with data, statistics that are so helpful to help you understand the global impact of whatever it is that is of interest to you. So whether that's life on land, gender equality, no poverty, or as I mentioned earlier, zero hunger, or one of these other options, look up the data, prepare before your service project, know some of these statistics so that you can be a content expert and share this with your volunteers to hopefully leave them with a hunger to return and to volunteer again so that they can continue contributing to the sustainable development goal. And so I'd love for everyone to pull up your chat, and I want you to just share, like, what's your favorite sustainable development goal, looking at these options here that you hope to contribute to this year. So everybody pick your favorite, and let's see if there's any kind of continuous themes in our chat.
We're still on the experiencing sharing slide. I'm not sure. Okay, there.
Not bad, y'all. So y'all didn't see any of this, did you? Okay, so sustainable development goals. Here was the 3 thoughts. So hopefully you took a note of those, but if not, feel free to take a picture of this so you can remember like 3 bullet points. And then these are the 17 options. So if you're not familiar with them, you can see all 17 of those. And then again, I want you to drop one in the chat that really interests you. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, Sierra. Good health and well-being, climate action, keep them rolling in, quality education, gender equality, life below water, life on land, reduced inequalities, cool, sustainable cities, a few zero hungers in a row, good health and well-being. I've seen several, gender equality, no poverty, another gender equality, reduced inequalities, life below water. Cameron, Life Below Water, there's this weird documentary on Netflix called My Octopus Teacher, and you all should check it out. Just leaving that there. Quality education. Was somebody saying something?
What was the name of it? I missed you. I missed what you said.
This is unrelated to service, but it's called My Octopus Teacher. I watched it and it is strange, but so interesting. It's a documentary. All right, you all. Well, thanks for sharing your proposed sustainable development goal. I don't want you to just propose these here, but in conversations you're having with your organization, share what you're passionate about. Find service opportunities that connect to your passion. I'll use site leaders in LSC, for example. You know, Kamya and Charlene are going to be responsible for finalizing our service sites, but then y'all should be able to see them with associated sustainable development goals. Try to sign up for the ones that align with your interests. Project coordinators in Serve 205 recruit projects that align with your interest in sustainable development goals. Blazers on break, as we're determining the areas that we want to go serve, do your research on those areas to find out what sustainable development goals really contribute to that community so that, again, we're aligning with our passions. But also be open to serving somewhere that you know nothing about that sustainable development goal, that it might not have any interest to you, because you never know what you can learn and what will impact you and to really lead you to have a passion in the future. And so, like kind of has been a theme today, be open-minded when it comes to sustainable development goals as well. And so we have 30 minutes, you all. And I would be remiss if we did not use time in this last 30 minutes to do some reflection of our own. And so I want to just briefly review kind of what we covered today. It started with civic knowledge. So we identified all of our organizations. We talked about the concepts of service and leadership, specifically looking at the social change model of leadership. And we reviewed common terms associated to community engagement. We then shifted to civic values. We talked about the concept of active citizenship, and we looked at the demographics of our volunteers over the past year. And I hope your mind started thinking about how can we engage participants that we didn't engage in this last year. And we finished by talking about engaging our volunteers and sustainable development goals. And so now that you have this information, I want us to think about, why is this all important? How does this affect my organization? And even I have a box over here for you personally. And so I had hoped we'd be cool and use annotate, but clearly I don't know how to use that since we tried earlier. So I don't think we're going to be able to use annotate. But what I would like for everybody to do is we're going to take 5 minutes. I want you to write down one thing you've taken away today for each of these boxes. Okay, so I'm going to turn my mic to mute. We're going to put a 5-minute timer up. I want you to think about it, write them down personally. And then when we come back, I want at least one person from each organization to share for each of these boxes. Okay, and so I'm going to put a 5-minute timer up starting now. And if it's helpful, I'm going to go back to the previous slide for a second so that you all can see kind of these areas again. So you're identifying why it's important for civic knowledge, for civic values, and civic action, which we've connected the dots down here, as well as you personally. Y'all have about 1 minute left. All right, if you're continuing to work, that's okay, but we're going to go ahead and get started to be mindful of all of your time. And so, as I said, I wanted you to reflect on each area: civic knowledge, civic values, civic action, and for you personally, and reflect on why this is important to your organization and to you. And so I want one person from each organization to share a takeaway for each of these areas. And we're going to start with civic knowledge. And so I'm going to mute myself and ask someone from Serve 205 to share first.
I can jump in, Lauren, if that's okay with you. So I noticed when you pulled up the demographics that we had a lot less freshmen involved in our service projects than we have sophomores and juniors and seniors. And that was kind of interesting to me because I know personally, like as a freshman, I was wanting to get involved so badly. And kind of, I feel like the root of that problem is that whenever people ask UAB organizations, oh, like, how do I get involved? They always say, go on our Engage page and you'll see. But I know I had to actually go to one of the involvement fairs and talk to a representative from Serve 205 to find out a little bit more about it. And so I think that it's really important to recognize that freshmen don't necessarily know when to go or where to go to find service projects.
That's really helpful insight, Shannon, and I appreciate you sharing that. And I'm seeing a few heads shake, which lead me to believe that others of you have had similar thoughts or experiences. So I think there's a couple of things we could immediately do to try to address this. For the people in your organizations who are responsible for your Engage page, go edit your About section to immediately redirect them to Blazer Pulse. You all, in case you didn't know, if you're talking to a friend or meet someone in the Commons that's asking about service, you can go to your organization's Blazer Pulse page where your service opportunities are actually listed out and share those links. If you're not sure yourself how to navigate to it, let us know in your Teams chat and we can share those links directly initially to ensure you all can navigate it. But great point, Shannon. Thank you for sharing. All right, LSC, who wants to share something for civic knowledge?
I can go for LSC. So for the reflection, like I remember we were talking about like with the chat, like can service and leadership like be separated? And the consensus was no, like to be a leader, you need to be able to like serve, and through that, like the leader will show through its actions. And I think like with LSC, that's important since you have like the service leaders and even the people like the directors, and through that it like inspires like a change within the days of service to be able to encourage the volunteers to participate more and potentially be an active citizen.
Great takeaway, Emma. You know, something that I've heard from LSC members in the past is that y'all's name is the Leadership and Service Council. And I've had questions like, why don't we do any leadership programming if we're the Leadership and Service Council? The answer to that is you all provide leadership through service. So maybe y'all's name should be Leadership Through Service Council, but and has a nicer ring. But that's a really great takeaway and I appreciate you sharing. Now, Blazers on Break is a smaller organization pretty intentionally. And so I'm going to open it up to Blazers on Break. Was there anybody within y'all's small group that wanted to share a takeaway from civic knowledge? If not, that's okay. No takers? Okay, I will expect Blazers on Break y'all to contribute to at least one area, even though y'all are a smaller group. So just keep that in mind. All right, we're going to go to civic values. And so this time we'll start with Blazers on Break. Is there anybody in Blazers on Break willing to share a reflection from civic values?
I was gonna go back to the demographics when we reviewed that. I know for Blazers on Break, our info wasn't on there, but I think it still represents a big majority of representation of what the volunteers look like. So I think it's important to focus on Hispanic freshmen and international students and try to increase those numbers.
That's a great takeaway, Lexi, and I'm glad that, I encourage you to make a note of that so we can have continued conversation about it within Blazers on Break discussions, but really across the board, right? So that was collective service demographics. So I'm glad that that information was impactful to you all. Thanks for sharing. All right, anyone from LSC want to share a takeaway from civic values?
I can jump in. So we were talking about the spectrum of service. That was my first time ever seeing that. And I thought it was interesting how concern came after volunteer, because I would think you would be concerned and that would motivate your volunteering. But then I also thought about how under volunteer there was well-intentioned. And oftentimes you can be well-intentioned and that precedes becoming well-informed, so that hopefully your experiences as a volunteer, you might be well-intentioned, but as you continue volunteering or whatever you are, you become more well-informed about what you're doing, and that motivates you becoming concerned, because once you know more about what you're doing, you're more concerned about if you're actually executing and succeeding those impacts that you should be making for that volunteer experience.
Absolutely, Michaela. And so I hope that that was helpful for y'all to kind of piece that together. I would encourage you, as you're talking to your volunteers, to help piece that together for them. In fact, we could even print some little spectrum of service cards or something for y'all to keep on your phone to show them as an example, if that's helpful, because sometimes the visual helps you see those steps and how that order that maybe felt natural isn't really how it always takes place, that you do have to become well-intentioned sometimes before you get to the concern, and why it's important that you find that concern to become an active citizen. So great takeaway, Michaela. Serve 205, anybody want to share for civic values?
I can talk about it. So I was going to say something kind of similar before Surf 205. I didn't know kind of that spectrum existed. And, I always wanted to do more, but then also I didn't know how kind of. And so just seeing a spectrum just kind of helps me know where I'm at and what I want to get to in the future. So I think that's an important part of Surf 205 to hopefully let more volunteers know about it, because they might not even think about it. They're like, oh, I enjoy going to volunteer, so I'm going to go do it. But then maybe they don't understand the whole reason behind volunteering and how that can impact the community.
That's a great point, Eunice. And so y'all are kind of connecting dots. And so some of that you're connecting for yourself through these experiences, you're obviously growing as well, but through your growth, I hope that you start helping others connect dots, and that really happens through dialogue. So that engagement and having conversation around this is so important, but great takeaways. All right, civic action. Let's see, Serve 205, we'll start with y'all this time. Anybody want to share a civic action takeaway?
I can share. First and foremost, engaging volunteers is really, really important in all of our organizations, but in Serve 205 specifically. If our goal is to fulfill the mission pillar of community engagement, we need to ensure that the volunteers that are coming to our service projects are getting engaged and are becoming active citizens, because that's the ultimate goal of planning these service events. So we can get them to become regular volunteers and get more and more engaged.
That's absolutely right, Christy. Thanks for bringing that to all of our attention. Sometimes I think it's just a good reminder for us also, what is the bigger reason we're doing what we are doing, and our responsibility to not only the community, but to our volunteers. And so thanks for sharing that. LSC, anybody want to share?
I can share. So what I had written down, I said encourage reflection from every participant and then receive feedback to enhance your next events.
That's really important. So there will be some built-in strategies for y'all to take feedback. Sometimes it's difficult to get feedback verbally because people have different levels of comfort sharing that, especially if it's more critical feedback, which is okay to receive. We can grow from that. And so our organizations will all be developing strategies to gather feedback. It's not only though gathering the feedback, it's doing something with it. And so I want to encourage you all to look critically at the feedback you receive from your volunteers and think about ways to improve for the future. And so great takeaway, Ishka. Anyone from Blazers on Break want to share? Want to open it up to y'all also?
We're on civic action, correct?
Yeah.
I wanted to point out just that the SDGs, it's important to identify like which ones you align with, because if you're passionate about it, then it won't be like work, or it won't seem like this extra thing. It'll be just a passion and you'll love what you do.
Absolutely. That's why it's sometimes fun to make those connections beforehand, because when you have a passion for something or a desire to really make a change, that is often obvious through our actions, and you can really motivate and encourage and inspire others to give that same level of effort to make a change also. So that's really cool. Thanks for sharing, Lexi. All right, last area, and then we're going to wrap up for the day. Personal, and I'm going to just open this up to anybody. It doesn't matter which organization, but I'd like to hear 2 or 3 thoughts. What's a personal takeaway you have from today? How have you grown maybe in your active citizenship spectrum towards that idea of an active citizen as a result of today? What's a personal takeaway?
I guess a personal takeaway for me was just understanding where I identify on the spectrum in general. I guess I had never really thought about it until now. Well, until we looked at the graphic. But I think that's a great start is understanding where you are on the spectrum, so you can work towards getting better. What areas you need to work on.
Absolutely. That idea of self-awareness is important when it comes to leadership in general. And so that's a great takeaway, Cameron. I'm glad that was helpful for you. Anybody else have a different takeaway you want to share?
I think looking at the statistics and seeing just like visually all the different people who are volunteering and aren't volunteering, it just like opens up new possibilities, new ideas to just figure out how to improve that and make more people volunteer.
That's great, Eunice. I'm glad that that was helpful for y'all. I've never shared that data with y'all's organizations before, and it sounds like that was impactful. So that's something I'll try to continue doing each year. And in fact, I can even share that with you all after your months of service. I provide this data to student affairs in the division of student affairs at UAB on a monthly basis. So I'll try to be more intentional to share that with you all more regularly. Great. One final takeaway. Anybody else want to share? And we'll end with this last one.
I also thought it was when you made a point about focusing on certain groups, and as far as like Black students, I know I'm a part of BSAC and BMIN, and when we BMIN, we'll get some mentors or some mentees rather at the end of the summer, and we'll be looking for leadership opportunities and volunteer opportunities as for icebreakers for us to get to know the students a little bit better. And so like collaborating with LSC or other groups that could help us on both ends as far as getting them closer to being active citizens, and also helping our organization with the goals that we have as far as BMIN.
That's a great takeaway, Cameron. And you've really brought it to my attention that within our own organizations, there's probably so much opportunity to collaborate. If we just ask each other, like, hey, what are you involved in across campus? Like maybe I would even say, let's try to make that an icebreaker at some point. So, in your next organization meeting, maybe have everybody drop in the chat the things that they're involved in so that we have an idea of who already exists in these groups that we can easily have a connection for collaboration to better both our own organization, the community we're serving, but also support these organizations across campus. So that is a really great point, and I'm glad you've mentioned that. I want to encourage you all to ask those questions so that y'all can collaborate. Again, collaboration is kind of a theme of today, I feel like, as we reflect on what all we've discussed. Well, you all, there is 10 minutes left. And again, I am so grateful that you are willing to give 2 hours of your time on a Sunday afternoon for us to dive deeper into service foundations. And I hope that you feel like this time has been a good use of your time to help you feel better prepared to make a difference both in our community and as a leader on campus and your student organization. And so this is all that we have prepared for today. Do note that your organizations all should be actively meeting, and if you're unsure on what the next step is from your organization, reach out on Teams to your either executive director or president for more information. With that, thank you. Thank you for contributing and participating today. I hope you'll have a great rest of your afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you all soon in your organization meetings. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.